So who wants to be a missionary? It sounds exciting, right? Traveling to different places, new places, experiencing different cultures, seeing lives changed for Christ. But what if everything you thought you knew about missions wasn't the whole story? Welcome to the series, Who Wants to Be a Missionary? We're going to separate missionary myths from missionary reality. I'm Amy, and I've been a missionary in Colombia for about 30 years now. And today I want to talk to you about missionary myths. One of the first missionary myths that I want to talk to you about today is that missionaries live by faith, so they never struggle. So let's talk about it. Faith doesn't remove challenges for anybody, but faith is what carries us through them. And among the many challenges that missionaries face, one of the challenges that no one talks about a lot is loneliness. People often see the ministry, but they don't see the sacrifices behind it. And one aspect of loneliness that people rarely talk about is about the feeling of not completely fitting in everywhere. When you've lived overseas for years, you change. You change with the different cultures, with a different language. Something happens and something changes inside you when you live overseas. So you're no longer fully at home in the country you left, because life didn't stop when you left to go on the mission field. People got married, kids grew up, friends moved away, new memories were made without you, and you realize that you've missed years of shared experiences. But at the same time, you never completely feel like you're from the country that you're serving in. You may learn the language, understand the culture, and build deep relationships, but you'll always be aware you're not originally from there. And in some ways, I think you find yourself always living in between two worlds. You don't fully fit there anymore in your home country, but you also don't fully fit in the country that you're serving in either. And it's a strange feeling because you love both places, yet sometimes you feel like you don't completely belong to neither. I've come to realize that aspect of loneliness isn't necessarily a bad thing, because it reminds me that as believers, our ultimate home isn't a country, a culture, a passport. Our citizenship is in heaven. And maybe that's one of the hidden treasures of this aspect of loneliness and this aspect of the lessons that we learn in missionary life, that God gently begins to loosen our grip on our earthly identities and reminds us that our deepest belonging is found in Him. Another part of how missionaries may struggle is culture shock, learning how things work differently, different expectations, different communication styles, things that seem normal in Colombia, but it's confusing to me. And not necessarily now even confusing. I understand it, but it's just something that I'm never going to actually think the way that the culture thinks here. Not in necessarily bad ways, it's just different ways. For an example, Colombians and greetings. Colombians are big on greeting. You greet people. You say good morning, you say good afternoon, you say good evening. If you don't, it can be considered rude. And I've actually had people to get very offended with me because I didn't greet them in the way that they expected that I was going to greet them, or I greeted the person that was beside them in a different way that I greeted them, and they got offended. And I've had people actually, when I've been pastoring churches, leave the church. That is how big and how very important it is for Colombians and greetings. And I still have to work on that. Sometimes we'll finish church service and I'll go get in my car and I'll think, oh, I forgot to tell everyone bye. And I'll go get out of my car and go back and say, hey guys, I forgot to tell you bye. And then I'll go person by person and tell them bye. For an American, it can be exhausting because it's not our culture, but it's just a shock and something that you have to learn and something that you have to be very conscious of when you're in Colombia. Another cultural shock for me was learning that hospitality in Colombia is serious business. In the United States, someone might offer you something once, something to drink, something to eat, or they may not offer you anything at all. It's not common for us when you go into someone's house to immediately offer them something to drink or to eat. It is in Colombia, and if you say no in the United States, that's usually the end of us. But in Colombia, if someone offers you anything to drink or eat and you politely decline, don't be surprised if you will be asked, not just once, not just twice, 3 or 4 times, "Are you sure? Can I get you something else? Would you like something instead?" When I first moved to Colombia, I actually hated coffee. Never drank it, didn't like it in any way, shape, or form. But you can only turn down Colombian coffee so many times before they consider canceling your visa. So I started accepting the coffee just to be polite. Now the baristas in Juan Valdez know my name. And today I am proud to say that I am a Colombian coffee connoisseur. So there are things that you get used to, things that you do politely that you wouldn't necessarily accept or do in other situations, in other cultures, but here you do. And I'm very happy that I have, because you gotta love Juan Valdez. Another culture shock for me was personal space. Americans, we are big on personal space. Colombians don't have personal space. They stand closer when they're talking to you. Their physical greetings are usually much more relational than Americans. I remember my first church service in Colombia. Actually, my first church services in Colombia. I walked in expecting a few handshakes, maybe a quick introduction. Instead, before the service was over, I had more strangers hug me and kiss me on the cheek, men, women, than I had my entire life. And honestly, I was totally freaked out. I was a lot freaked out, not a little bit freaked out, a lot freaked out. Now, over the time that I've lived here, when I travel to the United States, I have to remind myself to not greet people in that way, not kiss people on the cheek, not have to hug everybody that's in the room, because then I'm going to be the one freaking people out. And nobody makes you feel welcome quite like Colombians do. And you don't realize how much of your life or how much of life is automatic until you're suddenly in another culture and nothing works the way that you're used to. Talk about an identity crisis. Talk about having to remind yourself where you are. Even when you go home, there's a culture shock in going back home. Going back to the United States, there's a culture shock when you're here. And so I thought culture shock, when people would talk to me about culture shock, I thought culture shock would be language, maybe the food. But what I discovered was that culture shock is really about learning a different way of thinking, a different way of communicating, and a different way of living. The third aspect I want to talk to you about of how missionaries struggle is with discouragement. Sometimes you pour your heart and your life into people and you don't see immediate results. Sometimes you pray and you wonder if anything is changing, and sometimes you question whether you're actually making a difference. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions about missionaries, or the biggest myths about missionaries, is that because we're following God's call, we never get discouraged. There was a season in my life that I was walking through one of the hardest battles I had ever faced. I was going through a divorce in a foreign country, trying to figure out who I was again, and dealing with the heartbreak of people that I thought would stand beside me, but they did not. I was disappointed. I was exhausted. And there were times that I wanted to quit. There are times that I made up my mind, this is it. I'm not doing this anymore. It's too hard. I quit. At that time, I was living in Bogota. Right now, I live in Ibagué. It's a city in Colombia. And I'd made up my mind that I was just going to stay there permanently. I was going to help out in a church there that's in Colombia. It felt easier. It felt safer. And honestly, I was just tired of fighting. As I said, I was exhausted. But in the middle of all that pain, God reminded me and began to speak to me something that I had forgotten. My circumstances had changed, my relationships had changed, my life had changed, but my calling had not changed. God had called me to Ibagué. And just because I was going through hell on earth at the time, it didn't mean that God changed his mind about where he called me to and where he wanted me to be. And one of the greatest lessons I learned in that season is this. Discouragement isn't a sign that you're outside of God's will. Sometimes it's evidence that you're in the middle of God's will, in the middle of a battle in God's will, but you're in the middle of God's will. The enemy would love for us to believe that hardship means that we've missed God, but that is not true. Sometimes the struggle, it doesn't mean that you've lost your calling. It means actually sometimes that you're closer to your calling than what you ever have been. And looking back now, I'm so grateful that I didn't quit. And the last thing I want to talk to you about today in this video, in this first video actually that I'm doing, is the struggle of financial pressure. Most people assume that missionaries either have, or not most people, maybe some people, that missionaries either have a board that pays for everything, a missions board that pays for everything, or that somehow money magically appears in our accounts. People hear the phrase living by faith and assume that it means you never worry about finances. But the truth is, missionaries have bills, unexpected expenses, emergencies, and ministry costs just like everybody else. One of the most challenging parts of missions for me has been raising support, not because people are uncaring, but because missions often isn't visible. And if you're not keeping it in the forefront of people's minds, it's very easy to forget about people who are on the mission field in other countries. You're asking people to invest in lives, in churches, in ministry opportunities that they may never personally see, and they just have to trust. They have to trust that you are using those funds to sow into missions. And one thing I think that along with the financial struggles that everybody faces, I'm not saying that missionaries are the only people that face it, everybody faces financial struggles, is that people don't realize about missionary life. One of the things that people don't realize is the uncertainty that comes with raising support. In most jobs, you generally know what your income will be next month or next week. In missions, that is not always the case. You can't call somebody up that's been supporting you faithfully for a year and say, hey, you didn't support us last month. Are you going to continue your support? You can't do that. Life happens. People face emergencies. Circumstances change and priorities shift. So there are seasons when you simply do not know exactly what's coming in month by month. And in many ways, it's a wild ride. It's living on a prayer. But there have been times when I've looked at the numbers and wondered how everything was going to work out or how everything was going to come together. I actually do that quite often. I probably do that monthly I usually put in the beginning of the month all the needs that are in front of me personally and most of all ministry-wise. Because all of the things that come into missions goes into missions. So you're not just thinking about you're thinking about what can you do? How can you sow? How can you help? Maybe it's another church. Maybe it's another missionary. Maybe it's one thing this month and one thing the next month. And one thing that I do is put all that before the Lord in the beginning. And I see most of the time, probably all the time, the numbers never work. It never looks like they're coming together. And raising support has stretched my faith in ways that I never expected because it forces me in a good way to trust God and not the numbers. And so that's where some of the greatest lessons have actually come from for me personally. I've learned that my provision isn't dependent on human awareness. It's dependent on God's faithfulness. Over and over and over again for 30 years, I've watched Him provide in impossible situations through people, through churches, through unexpected gifts, through faithful people that give every month, and through opportunities that I never saw coming. And His provision doesn't always come early. Most of the time it doesn't come early in my timing, but it always comes on God's timing. And while that uncertainty can be challenging, it's taught me something that I might have not learned otherwise. My security isn't found in a predictable income. My security is found in the faithfulness of God. And the reality is that all of these things are things that missionaries struggle with. Faith doesn't remove those challenges. Living on the mission field, living full time in your calling doesn't remove any of those challenges. It doesn't remove the loneliness. It doesn't remove the culture shock. It doesn't remove the discouragement, the financial struggles. So what keeps a missionary going? The call of God, number one. That's what keeps me going. I would never turn my back on the call of God. The faithfulness of God, the lives that are changed, and that joy that's inexplicable, that you can't explain exactly that feeling of knowing that you're exactly where God wants you to be. And honestly, we are all on a mission. For some, like myself, that mission is across the world. For others, it's across the street. God's called every one of us. Will you say yes? Will you go where He sends you? Will you serve where He plants you? Will you remain faithful when the journey is harder than you expected? Because we're all called to be missionaries somewhere. The only thing left to decide is whether you'll be the missionary where God's called you to. So I want to thank you guys for watching. Next week, we're going to go on a second episode about myths that people believe about missionaries. I really appreciate you watching today. And so keep seeking after God. Be ready all the time. And thank you for your support and your continued prayers.